go with the cuirass that I've made in the previous video. If you haven't seen that, go watch that here. I'm going to be making some shoulder armour, so I'll have a pauldron and 3 segmented pieces going down to cover my arm to about there. It's just above the elbow. So the first thing you want to do is you want a design for the pauldron, which is the piece that covers your shoulder. Now, I'd say just do a circle, take about, say, 1 inch or 2 out from each side of your shoulder, work out how wide your shoulder is, combine that and have a circle sort of around that radius, up around there. Then cut a slot into it. When I did this, in this video, you see me doing something with right angles. Because this tends to split, and I found this was a problem, I'd say it'd be much better to cut a curve where I've done that, and it'll still fit on the armour, it'll still do all the other things. Okay, so I have my piece cut out of 2mm steel, and I've got a little indent that I've just chiselled into a block of wood. It's not a perfect hemisphere, in fact it's a very bad version of a dishing stump, but it works for the solution. You just have to be a bit more careful with the hammering, because of course it's not an exact indentation to follow. I just use it as a hollow area to hit into. So get your piece, start on the outside, grab the biggest hammer you can find. It helps if you've got an end like this, especially if you're working through thicker metal. I'm using 2mm, so I do need to use the rounded end. If you've got thinner, you might be able to work it with this side, and sometimes it does work better with this side as it does less damage to the other side, so there's less to plenish out afterwards. But all in all, just level this out, start smashing it with a hammer, and there's not much that can go wrong, so outside, and I'm going to work in rings, so I'm going to go round around this side, and I'm going to do another loop, and I'm going to do another loop, and keep working on the inwards. This helps the metal bend better than doing it the other way, but really any method works as long as you hit it long enough. So now the initial hammering is finished, I have something that vaguely resembles the correct shape. Now what I need to do now is get this bit curved around a little more. I'm just looking to see what's not finished. So clearly this bit isn't bent round enough, it's not bent enough in this direction. That's to be expected because of course you've got the gap there, I haven't got a gap there. So it'll want to bend more in this direction than it'll want to bend in this one, because there's just more metal to bend, really. And so, all you do to continue is you sort of turn it over, you work out where the sort of flat areas that need to be moved more, this is one here, and you hit them really hard. Now the piece is pretty much to shape, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work it over this stake. This has been made very simply by getting an old chisel and clamping it in my vise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do effectively the reverse of what I did on the plate, and I'm going to put the piece of metal over the chisel, stake as you call it, when you're using it like this. I mean, it's not a proper stake, it's a chisel, but close enough. So I put on my big gloves again, and I'm just going to hammer down. It's been about another hour of hammering, and I've gone over the entire surface of this. Using that, I worked my way inward in progressive circles, like this. So a lot of the bumps that were in it are gone, there's just a load of small ones remaining. So to make it perfectly nice and flat, the next step is to plenish it. Now that requires a special type of hammer. They can be bought online for not that much, and the idea is that you have a very, very flat face on this, because the metal will try and assume the shape of what you're hitting it with. So when you're trying to make it into a hemisphere, you're hitting it with a ball-headed hammer with a hemispherical end. So now if you want to remove all the bumps, you hit it with a nice flat surface on the stake, so it's between two flat things, and it will tend to go flat between those two, making a smooth surface. An easy way to know where to hit is to get some chalk and just rub it over the top. Now, as you can see, what this does is it reveals exactly where all the raised areas are. So all you need to do is rub the surface with chalk, give it a nice coating, and wherever there is a chalk mark, you need to then hit that location with the hammer. The next step is to heat treat it, and by what I mean by this is we're going to put it into the forge, heat it up until it's growing a nice red, and then plunge it into cold water. This will cool it very quickly and harden the steel. So I'm just going to put it in on the top here, push it to the back so the flames can't escape out the back, and turn on the fan. So what's going to happen is that coal under there is going to bring the entire area up to temperature, and once it's in there I'm going to quench it in that container of water there. Going to transfer it over to the quench and get this hardened. So I pick it up, take it out, and crunch it into the water. Brush off all the scale it's got on it. And we have a nice piece of hardened steel, and all we've got left to do is temper it. Now one of the solder plates has been heat treated. I just want to take the quick opportunity to show something that I think is rather interesting. If I take this one, this is the one that's not been tempered yet, and hit it with a hammer. It's a metallic ring. If I get the one that has just been quenched, so it's now a lot more brittle, and hit it in the same place, they're relatively the same, so it should be the same sound. But that's a much more high-pitched sound. To give you a basic comparison. Now this is because what we've done in the quenching stage is to make this a lot more brittle. You've cooled it so quickly from such a high temperature that the iron has actually formed a more crystalline structure than the usual metallic lattice that it has. Again, I'm not an expert on this sort of thing, I couldn't tell you exactly how or why it does this, but that makes it a lot more brittle and a lot more hard. So actually, as armour, the one that hasn't been heat treated yet would be a better piece of armour. But of course, once you've tempered this, it loses the brittleness, it loses the fact. If I smash this with the hammer now, it would probably just break in half, which is definitely not what you want from armour. which is why the tempering step after this is so important. Okay, so the last step left to do is to temper them. You could do this on the forge again, you could just leave them and watch the colour of the metal, but getting this done evenly is very difficult and quite risky, because if you overheat it, the metal goes back to being how it was before, and effectively all of the heat treating you've done is rendered completely pointless. There is, however, an easy way to cheat. This is called an oven. So just get your two pieces, stick them in the oven, crank it up as high as it will go. So gas Mach 9 is, if I remember, about 300 degrees C, which corresponds to a sort of between the purples and the blues on the temperature scale for metal, which is quite usefully exactly the temperature you want to temper armour to. So just leave them in the oven for an hour or two, and they should have changed colour to a sort of dark purple or blue colour, at which point you know they're tempered and they're finished. It's been about a week since I did the previous step, so they've had plenty of time to come out of the oven and cool. So now, as you can see, you've got a very nice blue-purple colour on the inside there. I don't know how well the camera's picking it up, but I'll try and angle it towards the light so that you can see it. So I'll take it close to the lens. See the clear blue colouring here. But on the outside, it doesn't really look that nice yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a wire wheel on the end of this drill and sand off all of the scale and black coating that we got whilst we heat treated it from the outside. Now the armour's been polished nice and shiny and is all smooth on the surface. The last stage is of course optional. This armour, if you want nice shining armour, if you want to use the very overused term knight in shining armour, this is good. But bear in mind that armour of this type is of course very exposed, and that means that it's very prone to rusting. So something that was done a lot in medieval times, and that I'm going to do here to make it a lot more resistant to corrosion and rust, is to blacken it. Now the method of doing this is actually very simple. You get, this is just normal sunflower oil, as the sort you'd use for cooking. Get a very thin layer of that, and try and evenly spread it over the top of the piece, just so you've got a really thin layer of oil spread evenly over the top of the piece. Really doesn't have to be thick or anything, it's just a very thin coating of oil over the top. One thing you do want to try and avoid here is any streaks or unevenness in the oil, because of course that will affect how it looks at the end. So I'm just going to use a bit of iron wool to spread it a bit round. So then what you do is you'll heat that from the other side until it turns black. So to do that I'm going to use a Bunsen burner, although anything that can produce a fair amount of heat will do. If you have a torch you can use one of those. So, just going to put that there, open the valve so it's a little more focused. Of course pick this up with some tongs, because I don't fancy getting my hands that hot. I'm just going to put it over the top here. So initially nothing will happen, but just try and put an even coating on the underside. That's maybe a little too much. And just heat it up until it starts to change colour. At that point it should go an orangey colour before going to a very dark black. You might have to do multiple coats. Now this black oxide coating is very useful because of course it makes it water resistant. because unlike rust, this coating won't flake off. The problem with rust is that it will react with the oxygen and then it'll flake off, revealing more metal, so the metal is destroyed by the rusting. Whereas metals like aluminium react in a way that creates a protective layer. So effectively what we're doing here is doing that to steel to give it a protective coating. Now, as you can see here, it's started to change colour and there's slight wisps of smoke coming off the top. So you just want to move the heat around and spread that colour all over the piece. Try and get an even heat over everything. One downside of doing this is it makes whatever room you do it in smell like a fish and chip shop, although depending on how much you like fish and chips, that might not be a downside to you. Okay, so that's the entire piece done. It's a sort of dark brown, if you can see at the moment. So you want to add more layers until it's a proper full black. One advantage of this is, of course, if I get some iron ball and scrub it a bit, the coating doesn't come off. So this is a coating that's resistant to things and will protect the metal very well. So once you have your main shoulder piece finished, the next step is to create the upper arm armour. It will attach onto the bottom like so. This is going to consist of 3 pieces of steel, each one slightly more curved than the last one so that they all fit together, and they're held together at the back by 2 straps of leather riveted onto the main section using copper rivets. The reason for the gaps here is to allow it to move freely, which means that this armour won't hinder your movement, because you can have something that's as indestructible as you'd like, but if you can't move, you're still at a disadvantage, and once you've been beaten in a fight, no matter how good your armour is, there's nothing much to stop somebody getting their knife or some other sharp object and jamming it right through the gap in your armour. There were specifically designed daggers in medieval times for doing such this. They were referred to often as kidney daggers, or another name that I'm sure people will know. So, to make this part of the armour, you'll need to make 3 pieces of steel this shape. I made this template mostly out of just a bit of card, and it needs to be the right size so that it's just wider than the distance you need to go halfway around your arm. After a lot of cutting, I have my 3 cut out pieces of steel for the armour. Now, I'm going to roll the edges of these, which means I get the edge and I'm going to take it back round. This, as I will demonstrate on this piece, from this armour, means that you've got a very smooth edge on the outside. And as you can see, it's folded in on the inside, that's how you get it. This, I think it's mostly just aesthetic, it makes the armour look better, but it also means it's less likely to cut you, and the last thing you want is for the thing meant to protect you to be the thing doing the injuring. So to make this easier, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get 3 sides of the piece. So I'm going to do that one, and that one. And I'm going to hammer it so that the piece is thinner at that edge. What this will do is it'll make it a lot easier to fold the metal round once I get to that stage. The next step, now I've got the edge thinned out, is I'm going to take the edge, I'm going to place it so that the edge is slightly over the edge of the anvil. You can use any flat, solid piece of metal for this. And then I'm going to hammer at a 45-degree angle so that this side is bent down 90 degrees. I'm going to make sure that I periodically return to the corners to make sure that the corners bend right, because you don't want to do this side and then that side and have them meeting at a 90-degree angle in the corner. It's always best to lock down the corners a little bit before you do everything else. If you notice, I'm striking specifically so that the shot glances down, off, in a sort of more... Rather than hammering directly onto it, I'm hammering so that it moves downwards. And once you've gone around once, you just want to hit a slightly greater angle and keep moving the side down until it's at 90 degrees to the original side. Starting, of course, at the corners. Alright, so once you have your edge bent at pretty much a nice 90 degrees, the next step is to start folding the edge round in on itself. So get to the top of your piece, hold it in place, and start hitting down and in. Note how I've angled the piece that way, and I'm hitting this way to try and curve this bit down in on itself. And you've got to be very careful with the corners. Usually the corners don't want to bend like this, because of course you've got two pieces coming in opposite each other, and that means you have to physically compress that bit. There's no real easy way to deal with the corners at this point. I tend to just hit them as hard as I can and hope it works. So yeah, as you can see now, this is starting to curve in on itself around. So once you've finished that, you just want to hammer down from above, and you should be able to drive that piece all the way down onto itself. Now the edges of my pieces are rolled, I have the three of them, and the next thing I've got to do is I've got to bend them round so that they fit my arm. So I've roughly arranged them in order of size. They're all pretty much the same size, but due to the rolling, the edges will be slightly different. And now I'm going to bend them round. The way I'm going to do this is I've got a vise, I've opened up the vise, and I'm going to place the centre of the piece over the middle of the vise, get my hammer, and then very gradually and carefully hammer in the middle of the piece to bend it. As I'm doing this, I'm going to move it side to side so that I bend it evenly over the entire piece. You'll notice I'm also moving the hammer back and forward so that the front part of it bends the same as the back part. Now what I've got to do is I've got to look at where it's bending And make sure that if there's any flat sections, I get rid of them. And just make sure it all bends evenly over the entire piece. The easiest way to do this is from reflections of light against the surface. It can easily tell you where some bits are bending and where some aren't. So now the piece should fit onto my arm around here, and as you can see it fits quite well. So that piece is about the right size. Now I'll bend the other two pieces. Now all three pieces are bent. They fit into each other quite nicely, but they still have a little bit of room to move. You often have to fiddle around with this a bit and hammer it a bit, but eventually you'll get them to fit like this. So finally we need to attach them all together, so I've got two nice strips of leather, and I've got these very nice little copper rivets. You can make your own from copper rod, but since I have these, I'm going to use them. So the first thing you want to do is you want to work out where you're going to put your holes in the bottom plate. So I'm just going to work out this one will go about here. Make sure everything's up good. Pull back to about there. A dot there. Second one will go on about here. Pull back. A dot about there. You want to make sure that your dots are generally the same height, approximately, for purely aesthetic reasons. And then you want to drill two holes through the metal so that you can put it through. Make sure that the hole you drill is the same diameter as the rivet. Any bigger and it'll be a pain to get the rivet spread wide enough that it won't just go through the hole, and any smaller, and logically of course the rivet just won't fit through. You might need to invest in a proper set of metal cutting drill bits, as normal drill bits often blunt themselves pretty fast. But I have a nice 5mm drill bit that matches my rivet very nicely, that'll go straight through this stuff. Finally, once you've drilled your holes, get your rivet, put it on the outside with the rounded face on the outside. Get it into the hole. Sometimes if there's stuff left over from where you've been drilling it, they can fit quite tightly, so it takes a bit to just knock them through. Then get your piece of leather. And push it through the leather. You want the hole to be fairly tight, of course, otherwise it'll pull off the leather. So that's why I'm putting it through a very small hole instead of doing a bigger hole for it. Angle it so that everything's good. Then hammer down on the top of the rivet, spread it out, and attach everything together. And if you are using bought rivets like I am, and want the outside to just look a little more handmade and medieval, you can always just hammer down on the outside to make the face of the rivet look a little more authentic. So then proceed to do that with the other side and all the rest of the other two pieces. Here are the completed shoulder plates, with the main shoulder riveted to the upper arm. Now, on the cuirass I made in the previous video, you may have noticed some straps on the shoulders that allow me to connect to this. If you're just making these without any other armour, you might want to add a strap to go around your arm here to hold it on, but I'm going to attach to the main armour from a strap here. I thought I might as well show you how these straps are made. So you can bend the metal around to make these buckles yourself, but it's a right pain, and sometimes the metal has a nasty habit of snapping. So I prefer to just use bought ones because they're very cheap. So you get 2 of these loops, put a length of leather around it, and then you're going to stitch this bit together. You notice what I'm doing is I'm putting this needle in ahead of where I want to stitch to, pulling it through, and then I'm putting the needle back through the previous hole. This is called the back stitch, I believe, and it just makes the stitch more likely to hold together, and honestly I think it just looks better than putting a normal running stitch in something. But I think a normal running stitch will do for this. Now once I've sewed it, I'm going to cut round a nice rounded end. And then make a little hole in it that I can put my rivet through. This one's a little off to the side, but it should be fine. Then that's going to fit on here. The strap from the armour can go in there. And it'll hold on to this strap, and the arm will attach like that.